Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to City Hall. Woo! I am so honored to share this grand stage with so many dedicated city employees. Hello, dedicated city employees. We represent a broad array of agencies and roles, but those of us here who are women, women of all ethnicities, and those who are men of color have one troubling experience in common. Our work has been consistently undervalued. Almost all of us have been paid less than we deserve from the very beginning of our work life. When I graduated from college back in 1976, women made 60 cents for every dollar that men made. That means my classmates and I had far less value than our male peers in the most literal way. That means the deck was stacked against us from the very start. And that means we were set up for a lifetime of less pay and the likelihood that we would never catch up. Now, fast forward to last May when my daughter Kiara graduated from college. You would think, you would hope, that in the 4 decades between her graduation and mine, we would have closed the wage gap. But we've barely cut it in half. Today, women of all ethnicities make on average 80 cents for every dollar men make. White women earn 82 cents for every dollar white women make. Black men earn 73 cents for every dollar white men make. And women of color are paid the least by far. For example, Latinas make just 54 cents for every dollar men make. 54 cents. How can this be the case in 2016 in a country that claims to be a meritocracy? And how can we close this gap as quickly as possible? Today, the city of New York is answering these questions with bold, progressive policy, because we need to make fundamental changes in the way people are hired in our city. And let me say that again in Spanish because it bears repeating. Necesitamos un cambio fundamental en la forma de contratar trabajadores en nuestra ciudad. Y necesitamos hacer ese cambio ahora. Ahora. Now, here's the reality. From the very beginning of our careers, women of all ethnicities, men of color, have been paid less than our colleagues for the exact same work. And every time we get a new job, our salary is based on what we were making before. So not only do we start lower on the earnings ladder, we don't rise as high with each rung that we climb. The Commission on Gender Equity, which I lead as co-chair, is working to close disparities in pay and NYC and improve economic mobility. We are bringing the full force of city government to jumpstart the effort. The executive order that Mayor de Blasio is announcing today will go a long way to ensure equal pay for equal work in our city, beginning with our hard-working city servants, public servants. Because we can't wait another 40 years to close the wage gap, and we won't. It is now my great pleasure to introduce an up-and-coming feminist, a feminist activist, a young woman who currently works as a neighborhood organizer in the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. And she is exactly the type of developing leader any organization would be fortunate to hire. And she most certainly deserves equal pay for all of the skills she brings to the table. Hina, Navid, the floor is yours.
Thank you, First Lady. It's an honor to join you and Mayor de Blasio here today to talk about something that affects all of our futures. As the First Lady mentioned, I've been working for the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs for the past 2 years. Before working for the city, I did community outreach for a number of nonprofits. As an immigrant from Pakistan who benefited from DACA, President Obama's executive action to help immigrant children, this is an issue that's important to me. As a recent graduate who looks forward to attending law school and practicing immigration law, the sky is the limit and I'm just at the start of my career. Or so I thought. When you hear the statistics the First Lady just mentioned, it's frustrating. It's 2016. We shouldn't even be having this conversation, yet here we are today. And it angers me. Everyone has bills to pay. In many households, women are the sole breadwinners. Why should a woman have to work more hours or work 2 jobs just so she can make the same amount as a man? Why is it that you still have to be the most qualified woman to be as worthy as an average man? It's not okay. Whether it's $1, $100, $1,000, the point remains the same. Women make less than men for the same work. It's not okay. I have a 12-year-old sister, and I hope that this is something she won't have to worry about when she gets older. But as women, we need more than hope. We need change. And that's why I'm glad to have a mayor who acknowledges the importance of equal pay for equal work and is willing to do something about it today. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce my mayor, the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio.
Once again, Chirlane McCray was right. Hina clearly is an up-and-coming leader. Let's thank Hina for her wonderful remarks. Chirlane talked about the trajectory of her life. And she's told me stories many times over the years about that feeling, that weight of knowing that no matter how good you were, no matter how hard you worked, that there was a really good chance you would not be paid fairly. And I think it is very striking that the majority in this country, since women are the majority, that the majority have suffered under that reality for decades and decades. And the more we have looked at the question of inequality and income inequality, the clearer it is that we have to go at the underpinnings of income inequality. That includes sexism and unequal pay for women. That includes structural racism. Income inequality takes on many forms and has many reasons. Some of them are about some of the worst strains in our society that we have to weed out. But I can tell you, having listened to these stories for years, that Chirlane's own example, young woman who worked her way to Wellesley College, the College of Presidents, come back in a week, I'll be able to say that. Worked her way to Wellesley College, worked her way to New York City to start out in publishing, gave it her all, one of the hardest working people I've ever known in my life, but always knew that that threat of unequal pay dogged her wherever she went. And that has been a powerful example to me of why we had to do this and why New York City has to lead by example. There's another story in my life I'd like to refer to that is powerful in a very deep way, because my own mother, who traveled a very, very similar path to Chirlane. My mother, a daughter of Southern Italian immigrants, was very hardworking, very driven, worked her way to Smith College. And that was a shock to begin with, that this young woman was able to get to Smith College, and she excelled. And she wanted to go work in the media. And she got a job at the then fairly new Time magazine. This is at the very end of the 1930s. Well, she was exceedingly well educated and capable and driven, but Time magazine at that time would not allow women to be reporters. There was a ban on women being reporters, so she had to take the next job available, which was researcher, and paid a lot less. And that was the pattern of her entire life. She kept rising up through the ranks in different companies and communications, but always knew and would always tell us as kids that she knew that there were other people in the same exact company doing the same exact work getting a lot more pay. So this is something that in my family has been a reality, and it affected, of course, the whole family. I think in families all over this city, this has been a prevalent reality. Thank God it's out in the open now. Thank God we're talking about it, and it's the chance to do something about it. And it's time for New York City to take a decisive step forward. We are clear that the unfairness we're talking about here has been baked into our economy, has become something that affects the lives of women from the beginning of their career and then never lets go for decades and decades. We have to break that cycle here and now. So we are today devoting ourselves to an executive order that will end the practice of requesting salary history, which is one of the ways that this cycle is perpetuated. Because salary history that's based on unequal treatment then becomes the basis for the next salary, the next salary, the next salary, and it never ends. We have to break that cycle. We have to weed out the past, start afresh, and value everyone, and particularly value women who have been subject to this discrimination, value them based on their talents and their abilities and what they can do for the people of New York City in the job for which they're being hired. This executive order prohibits city agencies from asking job candidates about their salary history before making a conditional offer of employment. It will affect over 350,000 jobs in city government. And because it takes effect in just 30 days, we'll start having an impact in this year, 2016. We'll start to affect thousands of people who apply for open jobs or who apply for promotions and transfers to higher level jobs. So this is action that will happen right now, that will start changing the lives of women in this city this year. And that's what we need. I want to thank, there's so many people who are here because this is something that is passionate as an issue to focus on and to act on for so many people, including so many in my administration. This would be a good moment to say that the changes we're making have to take many forms. And one of the most foundational things we determine, I've often credited our First Lady for this point, Charlene said very adamantly from the beginning of the transition period, the senior leadership positions of this administration must reflect the population of the city and had to be a majority women. We're very proud to say that the senior leadership positions of this administration are majority women. And that is the first time in New York City history that that has happened. And that means that the highest paid jobs in city government today, the highest paid jobs are held by women. And those women hire more women on their teams, and so on and so on. But we wanted to make this systemic change through this executive order. Let me thank the members of the administration who are here, and again, here with passion to make this change. I'm going to name them all quickly, and you can clap for them all. Executive Director of the Commission on Gender Equity, Azi Khalili. Our DCAS Commissioner, Lizette Camillo. Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs Commissioner, Nisha Argawal. International Affairs Commissioner, Penny Abiwardena. Consumer Affairs Commissioner, Lorelei Salas. Human Rights Chair and Commissioner, Carmelyn Malalis. Sanitation Commissioner, Catherine Garcia. Appointments Director, Rachel Lauder. Commissioner for the Mayor's Office of Combat Domestic Violence, Cecile Noel. Small Business Services Commissioner, Greg Bishop. Yes, we hire a few men, too. That's right. Oh! There is nothing average about Greg Bishop. He is exceptional. Moving on, Department for the Aging Commissioner, Donna Corrado. Commissioner for the Department of Veteran Services, Brigadier General Lori Sutton. President and CEO of the Economic Development Corporation, Maria Torres Springer. and acting counsel to my office, Paul Rodriguez. We thank them all, and so many of you contributed to this progress today. The elected officials who are here with us adamantly believe in this change and are supporting us and helping us to build this change. I want to welcome and thank Assemblymember Richard Gottfried, Assemblymember David Weprin, Assemblymember Rebecca Seawright, Assemblymember Joanne Simon, Councilmember Ben Kalos, Councilmember Margaret Chin. Thank you all. Give them all a round of applause. Whoops. Councilmember Helen Rosenthal, Assemblymember Felix Ortiz, another one of our Commissioner for the Department of Records, Pauline Toole, and want to thank the organizations and advocates who have been so supportive of the Center for Children's Initiatives, A Better Balance, and Power Her NY. We thank you all. A couple other points I want to make. Part of the problem with this discussion of salaries and wage equity is that, let's face it, salaries are a taboo subject. People don't talk about their salaries. People are very careful about how they talk about their salaries. So in many cases, people are not able to even know if that disparity is occurring. In the public sector, we bring this out in the open. The public sector has, because we're unionized, because we do publish salaries, because we work from a different set of standards, the public sector has a much better record in this vein than the private sector. We believe this executive order will deepen that progress. But because people don't talk about their salaries, too much of this inequality goes on. And then it affects not only the employee, it affects her entire family. And again, in fact, it affects her earning power over years, in fact, over decades. So fixing this situation is not just a matter of our values and of fairness, but think about the positive multiplier effect. When you bring a woman to her true salary value, that means that correction will now affect everything that comes thereafter. And this is something we're proud of. We know that as we apply this executive order, it will have a very positive multiplier effect in the lives of those who benefit. And for many women who are just starting their career, it helps to ensure that their fair value is recognized for decades thereafter. That has an impact on the whole city. That has an impact on the livelihood of families and the stability of families going forward. So this is good public policy on a very practical level, in addition to the obvious moral grounding for it. This, one last point, is part of a set of initiatives that we started at the beginning to go at inequality and to go at equity. We knew that women were being treated unfairly in a number of ways, and that there were huge burdens on them economically. That's why we did paid sick leave for 1 million more people. That's why we did paid parental leave. That's why we did pre-K for all and after school for all our middle school kids. It's for everyone, but we knew in each and every one of those policies that we were giving women an opportunity to have a better life and to overcome some of those barriers and burdens. This is the next step in that progression. There's always more to do, but we knew this was another step in the same vein to bring us to a more fair society and to address income inequality at the same time. We are very appreciative of the fact that the City Council is looking to legislate on this issue for the entire city, and we look forward to supporting that effort. I want to thank Speaker Melissa Mark-Viverito for her focus on this issue, but we also know that anything done legislatively will take months and months before it ever would take effect. We need to do this executive order now so we could start evening up the score right now. No one should be blocked from a fair salary and from the value that they have earned. Let me say a few words in Spanish. Es justo que dos personas que hacen el mismo trabajo ganen el mismo salario. Estoy firmando una orden que prohíbe a las agencias municipales preguntar el historial de salarios a los candidatos para empleos. Así rompemos el ciclo de la discriminación y aseguramos que los salarios sean basados en los méritos. With that, I am proud to introduce someone who's been working very hard on this issue, Public Advocate Tish James.
So good afternoon, everyone. We stand here on the eve of possibly electing the first woman president. An amazing time in our country. Yes, you can applaud for that. And yet, we still have work to do to achieve a basic right, equal pay for equal work. But today, we pass a milestone on the road to equality. This has not been a rosy road. It's been a road filled with twists and turns, a road marched by women and girls who withstood persecution and mockery and bullying long before we even knew the word. It's been a road our mothers and grandmothers paved for us every day as they went to work, every time they spoke out, every time they demanded rights for themselves and for their daughters. But today, the mayor has helped the women of this city move us a lot towards fairness by banning the use of salary history in hiring city employees. Thank you, Mayor de Blasio. That's a round of applause. And I am also proud and grateful for the mayor's support of my legislation to ban the use of salary history in both the private and public sectors. We know this is the right thing to do. As most of you know, in April, my office released a pay equity report demonstrating the severity of the wage gap in our city, its causes, and how it is perpetuated. I knew that a problem this pervasive needed action that's immediate and sweeping. And when I went around to the members of the City Council, I was moved by how quickly every single woman in the council co-sponsored my bill, including one average man. Thank you, Ben Kalos. Because the women, they've lived these experiences, and they know these experiences, and they remember these experiences. But there are also the men who know that inequality for any of us is harmful to all of us. Mayor de Blasio's executive order will help women, our families, and our economy. It is particularly important because we have found that historically, our city government has been one of the worst offenders when it comes to pay equity. Women employed by our city's government face a wage gap 2.5 times as large as women working in the not-for-profit sector, and 3 times as large as women working in the private for-profit sector. But today is a new day. And as one of my sheroes said, Eleanor Roosevelt, she taught us, with the new day comes new strength. And on this day, women are feeling stronger. Our feelings are feeling stronger. We're standing up a little bit taller. Our city is feeling stronger, and I can see the destination on our road to progress. Let's keep marching this road together. Let's end wage discrimination once and for all, and let's make our society stronger for all of us so that little girls can dream again.
Now I want to introduce someone who is fighting for the rights of women and fighting for pay equity in a very, very tough venue, the United States House of Representatives, not a place that has been at the forefront of social progress lately, but she fights on, and we thank her for it, Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to join Mayor de Blasio and the First Lady of our city in their effort to bring New York City employees one step closer to pay equity. I am thrilled to join my colleagues in government and employees and like-minded men and women who are supporting this effort. When you get right down to it, what we're talking about is just plain old-fashioned fairness. Because as things stand now, employees, especially women, are all too often put in an unfair, disadvantageous position when they're negotiating a salary for a new job. They are often required to tell their employer exactly what they made in their prior job, and that sets the standard for what the employer then offers. And imagine buying a house or renting an apartment with this standard. The seller would require them to tell them exactly how much you could pay before they would say how much they need or need you to pay. And this would be a huge disadvantage. And it's that kind of disadvantage that helps to permanently bake into the economic pie in America the fact that women do not make the same as men. In the 2015 census, it shows that women make 80 cents to the dollar, and for African American and Latinas and others, it is far less, and it's unfair. It shows when I first started working, we were 59 cents to the dollar. We've gotten a raise, but it's still basically unfair, and it hasn't really budged very much over the years. The gap in New York City is slightly better, but we know that nothing less than equity should be acceptable. I released a comprehensive report in April from the Joint Economic Committee, on which I'm ranking member, that showed that when you control for all factors that cause or could cause a pay gap, there's still a 40% unexplained gap that many economists claim is due to plain old discrimination. Requiring job applicants to disclose history can perpetuate that pay discrimination, and that pay discrimination ends up in turning women to being twice as likely as men in old age to live in poverty. The 80 cents to the dollar then compounds in the pension, it compounds in the Social Security, and it compounds in the pay to put many, many women in poverty. It is so unfair. By relying on women's prior salary determined as a salary in a new job, an employer can be complicit in ensuring that the pay gap continues. This hurts women and the families that depend on them. I am so proud of New York for taking this concrete step of action to reduce pay discrimination for women and employees here in New York City. I hope that they will encourage other cities to follow their example, and I intend to introduce it into the United States Congress as a bill when we return. This is a very, very significant step forward, but I truly do believe that we will never eliminate the wage gap unless we pass and ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. Only by making Thank you. I've introduced it in every Congress since I've gone to Congress. I went to Congress with 10 goals I wanted to achieve. I've achieved all of them, but the Equal Rights Amendment. We will never end wage discrimination unless women's equality is guaranteed under the law. Then it would be enforceable. Without it, it won't be upheld in court. It's just that simple. So I hope that the mayor will introduce a Women's Equality Amendment right here in New York City and lead Congress once again in an effort of what we should be doing as a nation. Women deserve equal pay for equal work. And we are working hard, some of us in Congress, to achieve that standard. I am so proud of the concrete actions here in New York City to achieve that standard. You have passed many things that I have fought for, we've all fought for the entire time I've been in Congress, such as paid family leave, paid leave for the birth of a child. You've initiated them, flex time, all of this in the great city of New York. We need to follow your example. I'm so proud to join you in what is a very significant and important announcement. Thank you.
We're going to take your questions on this topic first, and a few of my colleagues will be available from city government to help answer the questions as we go along. So on this topic first. Questions? Yes.
Yeah. Economists have done studies that have shown that when you compare people doing the same job with similar experience and similar training, that the wage gap vanishes. It's, maybe a couple percent. In which case, the statistics that have been cited today showing a 40% wage gap or 30% wage gap don't really mean anything. Can you comment on this?
I haven't seen those studies. I think it's uniformly believed that that 80% number is accurate if you talk about the entire economy. There may be some sectors, I would be the first to say there may be sectors or levels of employment where that is less true. Arguably at the highest levels, maybe that's less true. But I think the problem writ large is persistent in the economy overall. And to Congresswoman Maloney's point, you know, the multiplier effect, I think, is a very helpful, powerful point. Once it starts, it not only persists throughout career earning, but then has impact on pension and retirement. So our understanding is this is still a society-wide phenomenon, and that if that 80% number is effectively accurate, obviously that's a very big gap to fill. Yes?
As you mentioned, the public advocate introduced legislation back in August that would ban employers from asking about salary history both in the private and the public sector, which arguably would impact, well, it would impact a lot more people.
Absolutely.
Given the makeup of the city council, which sort of leans in that progressive direction, obviously, what are the obstacles to passing the bill, and why not? Are you going to push for it, or do you think?
Yeah, as I said, I support the legislation. I appreciate the public advocates introducing the idea. I believe the Speaker wants to, but we're not there yet. That there's going to be, well, you have to ask the Speaker. There's a legislative process, and even with a legislative process coming to fruition, there's a lag time for something that's going to affect all employment in the city. There will be a lag time before implementation. And suffice it to say, the drafting of a bill like that in the final process is more complicated than something we do just for our own employees. So the simple answer for us is we could do this right now. We could reach 350,000 plus jobs right now. It'll take effect in 30 days, done, all within our power, versus something that will require both a legislative process and then a longer implementation timeline. Why wait? Yeah.
My understanding is that executive orders could also apply to contractors with business before the city. Do you consider including them in this measure?
In this round, no. This was focused on our own employees. There are some areas where we obviously have taken that approach, there are others where we haven't, but the discussion was just about doing it for our own employees. Yes?
Do you have any idea how much it will cost the city to actually equal the pay?
Yeah, we've looked at that. We think it's a very modest impact in the first couple of years, but then it grows out over time. The reason for that is in the first few years, you know, I can't give you the perfect number, but let's say we're talking about a few thousand jobs where either someone is filling an open role or going for a promotion or a transfer. The unionized jobs generally are not what we're talking about here, because the unionized jobs come with much more set pay scales. Obviously, people coming off a civil service list, there's not a lot of give in that. It's pretty much set. So you're talking about a relatively few jobs in the short term, but as more and more people fill jobs, there's more and more turnover, the cost starts to go up. And obviously, generationally, if someone has their salary corrected, let's take that 80% number. If because of this executive order, someone goes from 80% to 100%, they continue at that higher level throughout the rest of their career with the city. So I think in the short run, we're talking about single-digit millions, you know, several $1 million. In the long run, it's a bigger impact. But the logic, you know, and I think always of the needs of the taxpayers, you know, flip that question on its head. Okay, we could save money by being discriminatory. Well, that's unacceptable. Yeah.
90% of the city's workforce, according to this press release, is paid in accordance with collective bargaining agreements. So I'm curious to know if the union sets the salaries for individual jobs, how does the city get involved with what the union is paying?
Again, I'll let the lawyers come forward and folks who have been working on this, our DCAS Commissioner Lizette Camillo and my acting counsel Paul Rodriguez, they can help fine-tune the answer. But I think the common sense answer is you're talking about well over 350,000 jobs in city government, including housing authority, including health and hospitals, et cetera. And for all those jobs that are not strictly determined by a union scale or a civil service list, you're still talking about tens of thousands of jobs, and again, there's pretty regular turnover. So the impact is going to be very substantial by any measure, and most importantly, the multiplying effect, getting back to the Congresswoman's point. Once you make the correction, it has a very big impact for many years thereafter. So in the short term, I think the impact is on several thousand people. That grows over time. You want to add anything to it, or Brittany? Okay. Okay. Please. Yes, you can.
You know, this is such an important initiative We spend so much of our time really in the city government, and I know the mayor and first lady have, on ways to eradicate poverty. Well, one fundamental fair way to help eradicate poverty and take positive steps forward is to pay women fairly. There was a report done by Heidi Hartman, who is the head of the Women's Research Foundation, that if women were just paid fairly, equal pay for equal work, that you would eradicate half the poverty in America. Just think about it. We're fighting all the time for services, this, that, and the other. So this is a very, very important initiative, and I hope that other cities will follow the great city of New York in it.
Thank you. See, there's any over here, and I'll go over there after that. Yes.
Your release also talks about supporting Advocate James in an effort to expand this type of rule into the private sector. What kind of fight do you expect?
Look, the only measure we have so far, and this happened only in the last few months, was the state of Massachusetts, where there was a really intense discussion, but they got there, so that's encouraging to me. I am certain there'll be some opposition. I don't doubt that. But I think we will all, and I'll certainly look forward to working with the public advocate, with the speaker, and everyone to say, really, when you think about the opposition, where does the logical argument flow? If it is related directly to a discriminatory history, and this is a tool that could undo, we believe will undo that discriminatory history. So what's the counter argument? How do you address it? Knowing that discrimination has existed requires every effort to find a way forward, and so far this appears to be one of the most promising. So I think that's what will win the day. Question? Yes.
Is the city government's pay gap?
Is it what?
What is the city government's gender and racial pay gap?
Look, this is a complicated issue, to say the least. We believe it's a case-by-case kind of dynamic. We have found some instances, such as the decision we made around school safety agents, where we as an administration said, we think there's a historic problem here that needs to be addressed. We have found others where we think the situation is not at all as clear. So I don't have a perfect statistic. I think it is more nuanced in the case of the public sector. As I said, my view, I might differ with the public advocate on this, my view is public sector comes with so many more anti-discriminatory guarantees like union membership and disclosure that I think we're better positioned. I think the city of New York in particular compared to other public sector entities is. But we've had some of it, undoubtedly, and when we find it, we try and address it specifically. But I think the point here is this allows a much broader reset. And if a woman is coming into the public workforce carrying with her a private sector bias, then we get to correct it. That's the way we look at it.
Have you studied it?
We've studied it in certain individual cases where it's been brought up, particularly by labor, but we do not, in my knowledge, and I'll turn to my colleagues, we don't have a holistic study across the entire.
In the office of the mayor, of folks who work for your office.
Again, since the numbers I outlined before, we have the highest number of women at the highest salaries. I think that effectively says we have already addressed that issue. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I believe studies have also shown that women are less likely to push for promotions or to discuss salary increases. I know we're talking about hiring in the first place, but what can be put into place to ensure that with this eliminated, the offers aren't still lowballed compared to what they would be to a man?
I would answer this way. We're sending a very powerful message to all of our managers up and down the line that we expect pay equity. There is a provision in the executive order for any employee to have a formal complaint if they believe pay equity was not recognized. So we're making that very clear to our managers too. And I think, again, our team up and down the line will have every reason to want to buy into this. But if anyone needs an extra reminder, there is a complaint process, and if there is a complaint, we will specifically look into that in a formal manner. And if a manager were not to be following this executive order, there obviously would be consequences. So I think the point will get across. I also think, I believe this very fundamentally, and Charlene and I have had this conversation for a long time, if you want to change the dynamics, the rules, the laws are all important. The accountability structures, the consequences, but possibly the most elemental thing is just hire more women at the top positions, and they will enforce it for you. So, we talked about all the commissioners who are here. I think it's fair to say that they would look very unkindly on any manager downstream from them not addressing pay equity. I think it's going to be self-correcting on that level. Any other questions on this topic? Yes.
I would assume, and tell me if I'm wrong, that most of these positions are budgeted for certain amounts. So wouldn't that person be getting that amount, even if you don't know that person's pay history?
I think there's, and I'm going to look to my colleagues, I'll start and they'll correct me, these are my consciences here. I think there's always elasticity when you're talking about something that's not strictly stipulated by civil service, for example. There's always some elasticity. This is true of hiring, particularly for senior positions. And the history was very, common. If you came to me for a job and you were making $50,000 and the salary range was $50,000 to $70,000, then as a manager I would have an incentive to say, okay, I'll give you 55, not all the way to 70 because I think I can get you for 55, right? That's fine as a managerial principle, except when you have a discriminatory reality as the basis of why you got $50,000 to begin with. So as we looked at this more and more, we came to a simple conclusion. You had to disrupt the cycle. So yeah, there will be situations where someone, if they were asked their salary history, it would have led to them getting a lower city salary. That would have been sort of management 101. But it also would have baked in historic discrimination. We're much more comfortable freeing the situation up and getting people to a truer value. And so I don't think it's to the point about budget. Budgets obviously are based on broad personnel costs. We don't say, here's the exact amount everyone gets paid in every agency because we know that elasticity exists. So it's a broad pool and managers have to make decisions within that pool of money. But I think the most important sort of make it vivid is imagine just this progression where a woman is consistently held back from her true value. Then you say, that's no longer allowable discussion. We're not going to look at the past. We're only going to look at your value today in light of the job before us and what you bring to it. We believe that will organically, naturally start to increase pay. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, this piece about the most female managers and the most women of color, I wonder if, as a white guy, you can speak to if there's been a process...
Representing white guys everywhere, I'd like to say.
Valuing, elevating, listening to women and women of color, and if that's been a process for you, and what you would say to all the white guy bosses out there?
First of all, something I want to make clear from the beginning, my mother was a woman. And so I refer everyone to, Shirley and I are huge fans of Samantha Bee and the recent Full Frontal about the second presidential debate where she puts a graph up on the question of how many people should be offended by what Donald Trump has said about women. And she puts this graph up that kind of emerges on the screen and evolves, and it does a full circle and it says 100% of the U.S. population has a relative who is a woman. And I grew up in a single-parent household. My mother was, for the vast majority of my upbringing, was the sole breadwinner. My parents were divorced, and my father did not contribute to the household income. And my mother, clearly, because she went to Smith College, because she was a professional woman at a point where there were few, because she went to the Margaret Sanger Clinic as a young woman, there were a lot of things about my mother that was very clearly she had very strong feminist impulses. So my point is I was blessed to get the right education from the beginning and then to choose the right partner in life who furthered my education. So my message to white guys, my message to employers is this is just good for everyone. It really is. Yeah.
Do you know this?
Does it take learning? Sure, it takes learning. This dialogue was a very healthy one, but it's an understandable one. I'm sure people are going to read this and hear about this and say, oh my God, I'm going to have to pay more for my employees. But they're not going to, at first blush, necessarily think because we're ending a long-term pattern of discrimination. And so what I would say to white guys, how's this one on, try this on for size, if the shoe was on the other foot. If you were the part of the class that hadn't gotten fair salaries for decades and decades and decades, you'd sure want to be valued based on your actual ability. So do unto others. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. I got a lot of those. So, and I think it is good for the whole society. I do think it's really wonderful if you have an opportunity in life to be educated and enlightened by people who are different from you. Not everyone has had that so much. But for those who haven't had that, it's just basic fairness. And if it puts more money in the pockets of families, it makes for a better society.
First Lady, if you ever felt that you were a victim of or were being paid less than a man who's doing a comparable job, and then the mayor said in the past that you've been, a key advisor on hiring decisions within the administration. Do you still play that role?
Yes, I still play that role, and as the mayor referred, as the mayor said earlier, talking about salary is taboo, so I really can't say that in any of the positions I've had, from my work, from my days in publishing to president, I can't really say that there's been a direct parallel to a male earning more than me. I suspect so. When I first met Bill, he was making more than I was, and I'm like 6 years older than he is, and he's still making more than me.
Damn it. David, just a reminder on the role Charlene plays. Very substantial hire was made a couple of months ago, and I said to people at the time very publicly, the hiring of Jimmy O'Neill, the final interviews were done by Charlene and I, period. Yeah.
To the public advocate, you said that the...
You want to come over here too?
That the governmental sector is three times worse regarding the pay gap than the private sector. Why do you suppose the private sector does a better job of assessing people fairly?
What I said was women employed by our city's government face a wage gap 2.5 times as large as women working in the not-for-profit sector and 3 times as large as women working in the private for-profit sector. That's what I said. But I said that in the past, city government historically has been one of the worst offenders when it comes to pay equity. And as was referenced by the mayor of the city of New York, we do know that the Teamsters settled the lawsuit. And as you know, there's another union which is currently in negotiations with the administration regarding pay equity, and that is Local 1180.
Suppose the private sector has a better record than government or the not-for-profit sector?
So there's been a lot of speculation with regards to why private sector. I mean, there's this notion that women in the private sector obviously have more educational background and are in executive positions and therefore in a better position to negotiate.
Well, people like that, they don't have extensive education or training, but they work in the private sector.
Yeah, there's not a lot of science on why there's a difference between public and private. I do know that in the public government, there's unions to protect them. Those outside of the union contracts, obviously, there's been an issue of pay equity. In the private sector, again, on the executive level, there's more parity, but on the lower levels, there's still an issue of unbalance that needs to be addressed, which is why the bill that I am proposing would apply not only to public, but also to the private sector as well.
Sounds like the unions are doing a bad job.
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I said apparently there are individuals who are employed and not covered by union contracts, and that's the number that the mayor referenced in particular. Those with a union contract obviously are paid much more equitably than those that do not, but there's a significant number of individuals on the public payrolls that are not covered by the union contracts, and therefore this bill and the executive order would go a long way in addressing that inequity.
Okay, last call for questions on this topic, and then we're going to sign the executive order. Yes?
Would this prohibit negotiation by the prospective employee, or would it only prohibit you guys from asking?
So I will start, and my lawyers are ready. They are eager to answer. Again, it is you cannot ask before a conditional offer is made. Now, why don't we have Brittany and Paul come forward and talk about what happens after that in terms of negotiation process.
Yeah, so
You can introduce yourself.
So I'm Brittany Saunders. I'm currently Deputy Commissioner for Strategic Initiatives.
I'll give you more because of the sign. Hold on one second.
At CCHR.
Wait, say that all again.
I'll say it
just
all
so they
again.
Get it. Okay.
I'm Brittany Saunders. I'm Deputy Commissioner for Strategic Initiatives at CCHR, and I've also worked closely on this.
Human Rights Commission.
Human Rights Commission, that's right, to clarify. And yes, so the executive order bars the inquiry by the city agency, basically, so the city agency cannot ask the question about salary history unless it's after a conditional order, and even then, a conditional offer. And even then, only under limited circumstances. But it doesn't prevent an applicant from saying, these are my expectations or requirements, right? So there's still room for negotiation, but the city cannot rely on a salary history.
That makes sense? Good. Last call. Questions on this topic? Okay, we're going to go over now. First, Shirlene and I are going to just have a point of privilege and stand by this banner alone for a moment because we love this banner, and then everyone else can gather around for the signing. You're very proud of what's on this banner. Very good. All right. Gather around, everyone. Please move to the right. Hey, millennial, stop taking pictures of why don't we get some folks over here? Okay. Okay, let's let people know that we're about to start this up again. Okay, everyone back there, just bring it down, help them out over there. Jonathan? Javon, will you go over and tell people, please? Thank you. All right. Other topics. Yes, David?
At the beginning of the week, your administration sort of tabled a plan to sort of rethink how street fairs work in the city. I wonder what your personal feeling about street fairs is. Do you ever go to them? And why it was that you felt like a reform was necessary, and why it is that it was tabled?
Okay. Yes, I go to street fairs. I went to them more often when the kids were at home, growing up. The truth is, I think there are more burning issues in this city. So, in fact, this was something inside the bureaucracy, if you will, that this process was begun to reevaluate the possibilities. It was not something I initiated. It was not something I asked for. And obviously, it's something we'll continue to look at going forward. So I think the reforms that were made in the Bloomberg administration were broadly right. There were some cases I might differ on, but were broadly right. But we'll certainly look at it again in the future, but honestly not one of my priorities.
How did you learn that this was happening?
I learned about it the same way I often learn about things, that I heard that this was a process that was already underway in terms of the hearings, and one that, you know, would be coming out publicly.
About a potential terrorist threat time before the day before the election, and what is the NYPD doing to respond to this potential threat?
Yeah, so a couple of things. What we have now, this is, I talked about this on the radio a little while ago. This is something that I was briefed on several days ago. That is, at this moment, we're still developing information on. The level of credibility is not clear. It is definitely not an overly specific threat. So right now, the way the NYPD is looking at it and our federal partners are looking at it is we're in a state of vigilance. But to be clear, besides the fact we're always in a state of vigilance and we have our counterterrorism forces on alert all the time, we were already in a period of ramp up because of the marathon on Sunday and the extraordinary events of Tuesday night, having two presidential campaigns having their events in New York City. Again, someone can check the facts here. My memory is you have to go back many decades to find that having ever happened before, and obviously in a very different time with different security considerations. So we already were in a high ramp up dynamic. You're going to see a lot of officers out, particularly our Critical Response Command and SRG, Strategic Response Group officers. You're going to see a lot of measures taken very visibly around the marathon, which is all 5 boroughs, around all of the election activity on Tuesday. Obviously, all 5 boroughs, particularly the events around the candidates, will be in Manhattan. But on Monday as well, you'll see an expanded presence. We want to urge very clearly, everyone go about your business. There'll be a lot of NYPD folks out there to protect you, but also the reminder that we often give, if you see something, say something. If anything appears to be out of the ordinary, very important to report it.
Is the Board of Elections ready to handle the biggest voter turnout that's expected on Tuesday?
Well, I would first say I would love nothing more than it being the biggest voter turnout. I'm far from certain that's the case. You know, I think the 2008 Obama turnout was for the ages. I'm not sure we're going to meet that. But look, I would say two things. In terms of the broad integrity of the voting process, yes. In terms of efficiency, that remains to be seen. The questions that we've all raised, not just since the presidential primary, but in pretty much every cycle previously, we saw lines that shouldn't have been there. We saw machine breakdowns that shouldn't have happened. We saw poll sites not open on time. This is a systemic problem with the Board of Elections. And there are real solutions. One, I've offered them $20 million, which is not a minor amount of money, but they have to guarantee me certain reforms, and they have to be accountable for those reforms. They've still not agreed to that. Two, I think we should change the law in Albany, and I'm going to work hard for this, giving the executive director of the Board of Elections authority to run it in a professional, modern fashion. That the executive director does not have that full authority right now. So, look, I wish the Board of Elections directly reported to me. It does not. It is governed by state law. I think the eyes of this city will be on the Board of Elections on Tuesday, and if they once again have these kind of problems, I think the pressure will mount for bigger reform. Please.
Follow up on that. If this doesn't go well with the Board of Elections, will you look to see Mike Ryan step down?
You know, I think it's more complex than that. I have seen some real progress under Mr. Ryan, and I think he's saddled with a board that is not willing necessarily to cooperate in that progress, and also he does not have the full power an executive director should have. So I think he has been more a part of the solution than a part of the problem. I think the problem is structural and legal. We need to change the law.
I know you haven't really been willing to engage on this topic so far, but what are you going to do if Mr. Trump should win on Tuesday? I know Charlie Rangel told Medina that he's going to leave the country, but he doesn't have to be in office.
Right. I respect the congressman, but I look forward to staying right here. Look, obviously, I really do believe Hillary Clinton's going to win. I think it's a much closer election than we thought a few weeks ago, but I think Hillary Clinton's going to win. Second, and I was talking to some folks on my team earlier about this, I was already politically active at the time of Ronald Reagan's victory. And it was a devastating defeat for a lot of us. But what the lesson we learned is you stay at your post and you fight for change. So if there is a Trump victory, there's going to be a lot of work that will have to be done to protect what we value in this city from bad federal policies and to change the Congress 2 years later to continue making progress. So, no, I think people stay at their post and fight for change. Yeah.
As this event began, the Bridgegate verdicts came in guilty across the board for both defendants. Your reaction?
I'm not surprised. I mean, I think everything we've heard suggests a pretty lurid tale, and I suspect there'll be further ramifications in New Jersey for certain. So, I look forward to the day where we can get these kind of things behind us, and people who would do such a thing are no longer in the public sector. The good news is they've been caught, and I think it will, lead to further examination.
Should Governor Christie be prosecuted?
Should what?
Should Governor Christie be prosecuted?
I am not a prosecutor. I am not a lawyer. I certainly think he still has not given us good enough answers.
To follow up on the terrorism question, you described what it is not. It may not be, it will be specific. It may not be credible. What is it? I mean, what triggered this briefing? What do we know about it?
Look, I will refer detailed questions to NYPD and FBI. I think the most important thing, because this is, again, we've been watching carefully over the last few days, and we know this is a time of year where the threat stream increases. This is just a given. We're going to see it now all the way to January 1st. But what we look for is credibility and specificity. So far, we have unclear credibility and a lack of specificity simultaneously. So, again, to the extent the NYPD or the FBI want to fill in more blanks, they will. But what I can say in terms of our stance, besides overall vigilance, is we're just going to unite Sunday, Monday, Tuesday into a constant pattern of increased NYPD presence, and particularly, again, our counterterror forces. You will see a lot of uniformed personnel out, and we think that is what we need to do right now, and also want to encourage everyone, if they see anything unusual, to report it. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I was just hoping to clarify one thing on the timeline of the Rivington deal. When that first became public, you and your office said that you learned about it through media reports. When Tony Shores testified last month, he said that when he heard about it, he notified DOI, and then he notified you. And I was just wondering, did you learn about it from media reports or from Shores, and was it...
Best of my memory was literally the same day that the media reports and when I heard internally were the same exact day.
From Mr. Shores?
That's the best of my memory, yeah. Marcia?
Mr. Mayor, getting back again to the terror threats, are there any specific places that you think are going to be more vulnerable than others that you want to protect more seriously? And I'd like to sort of talk to you about this whole idea of outside forces, Russia or outside terror forces, trying to disrupt this election cycle through this. There's sort of a pattern through this election cycle with people hacking into computers and all kinds of other things. How do you feel about this? Do you think that democracy is under attack by outside forces?
Marcia, I think it's a great question. That there's a couple of things that have happened this year that we're going to need to look back on and decide how to address. First of all, Marcia, the fact that we saw one political party and one candidate attacked by a foreign nation through these hacking incidents, we never seen anything like that in the history of this country. There's certainly more to be proven, but our own intelligence community says it emanates from Russia and with the authorization of the Russian government. That's unprecedented in the history of this country. I don't think it's going to change the outcome of the election, but I think it has hurt. I think it certainly might affect voter participation levels, for example. I think it's caused some doubt, particularly in some states, about the sanctity of the electoral process. You have to add to that, then, Director Comey's action, which was unprecedented and I think very unhelpful to ensuring that we had a fair and objective election process. And then on top of that, having a candidate that I think we can all agree as a major party nominee, we've never seen anyone who went out of his way so much to question the voting system. And the fact, until his poll numbers were better about a week ago, Donald Trump's regular line was the election system was rigged, which again discourages participation. So you've got three things that have happened all in the course of weeks that do threaten the democratic process and certainly threaten participation. We need to ensure in the future that doesn't happen. One, we have to have an honest conversation about what the role is of the FBI in the 2-month period before an election, which previously was very clear, and now that precedent's been broken. We have to put that genie back in the bottle, in my opinion. Two, we have to get to the root of the Russian hacking and take measures against it, but also make sure that that can't happen from any country in the future. And three, I do predict the defeat of Donald Trump, and I won't be surprised if he then claims that the election system was rigged again. We have to prove to the American people that that's not what happened, that he just got rejected. Yeah.
I wonder if, God forbid, there was any kind of attack on the homeland the day before the election, if you think that would affect the outcome of the election.
Yeah, it's very speculative, obviously. I do feel a separate but related point. I feel that the electoral systems are broadly well protected. And I think there's an understandable confusion about how much they interconnect with the internet, and I've looked at this issue a little bit. They broadly don't. So the electoral systems are more self-contained, and a lot of work has been done state by state, locality by locality, to protect the election dynamics from any outside interference. On the question of whether, God forbid, there was an attack, what it would mean, look, I think we've learned many times over, part of the democratic process is resiliency. We go through wars, we go through depressions, and we keep our elections on schedule. So that's what I would predict in any eventuality. But I think the clear point about this, again, very vague information we've received is we've received it. And now everyone is on high alert and ready to prevent anything from happening. Other questions? Yes?
On the issue of voting and election reform, you had a press conference a couple of weeks ago pushing for what you want to see from Albany in the future. I'm wondering why that came at this juncture and not earlier, when perhaps more pressure on Albany to act could have had things in place for this election. And two, I don't recall Governor Cuomo coming up much in that discussion. He's had some of those things in his State of the State books, but hasn't, for example, fought for them publicly or had a press conference. And what do you make of his role in pushing for those reforms?
I think he needs to prioritize these reforms, or the people will do it for him. I think the world turned in large measure because of the Bernie Sanders campaign. And I think the simple answer to your question, which is often true in these realities, I think a lot of very fair questions are asked about why things sequence a certain way, why does something happen one year that wouldn't have happened another year. It's a thing called history. I think a lot of us were disgusted by the New York State voting laws years ago and thought they were unmovable, particularly with a Republican Senate that was not going to be friendly to voting reform. What's happened differently? I think the Bernie Sanders campaign changed the entire national discussion. Certainly what we saw happen in the primary did, but again, not with such speed that it was going to make it something that could be achieved by the end of this last June. Now, with the prospect of a Democratic Senate in Albany becoming increasingly real, that makes the next legislative session the best opportunity we ever would have had for electoral reform, plus the fact that more and more people in this country are angry about the way they're being disenfranchised and are demanding these reforms. And obviously, everywhere, early vote, same-day registration, these are becoming majority realities, and they're working. So all of those things are contributing to change. Obviously, the governor has to make it a priority.
Combine forces on it?
I would happily. There's no question. I want to get it done, and I'll work with anyone on either side of the aisle who wants to get it done. So I could happily work with the governor.
2 more questions.
Go ahead.
Are you satisfied with your level of engagement and involvement in the campaign thus far? Do you wish they called on you more? Do you wish they called on you less?
Well, one of the advantages of WikiLeaks, no, you haven't heard that sentence before, right? Yeah, look, obviously you guys now know that I've talked about it publicly, but you have more color to go with it now, that I have had a running dialogue with John Podesta and Robbie Mook for 2 straight years, and I think it's been a very, very productive dialogue. The number one thing I cared about was the platform, and as I've said, many, many, many people, many organizations contributed to that progressive platform, none more than Bernie Sanders and his campaign, but many other movements and people as well. And that's what this was all about for me, to get our party and our nation in that more progressive direction. So I feel very good about that. And I've been out in the last 5 weekends in 5 different states, in Wisconsin, Michigan, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And I've said whatever they need, I would do. I think the best thing I can do for them now is focus on turnout in New York City, because beyond electoral vote, there's a real popular vote issue here. And she needs a popular vote mandate. So that's my focus. If something changes, I'll happily deal with that. Yeah.
Returning to the terror threat, as vague as it is, it's been reported that the information that you received is that it involved Al-Qaeda. I wanted to confirm that. And second, on the radio a little while ago, you were asked if the threat itself could be an effort by someone to meddle with the election, and you said that you responded essentially this year, anything is possible. Could you please sort of enlarge on that and how that could be?
I'm not going to go into the origin of the threat. That's a question for NYPD and FBI. On the question, what I'm trying to say is I think we have seen some remarkable things this year, most notably the hacking by Russia. I don't want to surmise more than that what might be motivating this particular threat, nor how real it is. I simply think anything's on the table, given what we've seen already. On top of that, I remind you again, this is the time of year where we expect an uptick in threats. So unfortunately, it's consistent with what we've seen in previous years. That's the extent of my editorialization about it. Let me see if there's any more. Yes?
Have any interest in serving in a Hillary Clinton administration?
No.
I'm going to say today that even
I'm sorry, I should just elaborate so there won't be misunderstanding. It's not for any lack of respect for the administration I've been working hard to elect. I think it'll be a fantastic administration. This is my mission is here, and this is what I want to do and where I think I can contribute the most.
even though many of your managers, a peak number of women and people of color, that your inner circle of advisors, Tom Snyder, Tony Shores, Avi Fink, Kevin O'Brien, Phil Walczak, are men.
Yeah, you're right about Shirley McRae.
So
Come on. We just defined for you moments ago, and I'm not saying that it's not a valid question. I'm saying please start with the evidence presented, in the last 20 minutes. My number one advisor, I have said this from the transition till the day, is Shirley McRae, without question. And yes, there are many other people of many other different backgrounds who are part of our team, internal, external, who I turn to for advice.
are you still thinking about how can I bring more women into my inner circle?
I am looking constantly to continue the diversification of the administration from the top level on down. I don't have a conscious sort of sense of I need this particular type of person for this particular type of advice. I have a broader commitment to continuing and deepening diversification. Last call. Yes?
Next week, legislative leaders are going to be heading after the election to Puerto Rico. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the importance of the conference to you and what you kind of accomplished there.
Yeah, look, I think two things. One, support for Puerto Rico, and like many people, I'm less than satisfied at what the Congress has done so far, and I'm very worried about Puerto Rico's sovereignty in terms of the way the financial crisis has been addressed. I don't want to see, and I believe there's already some danger of sovereignty being undermined. On top of which, we're only beginning to address the Zika crisis, which is a national crisis. I think Puerto Rico deserves a lot more support there. And overall, the Puerto Rican economy is not going to recover if there's not a stronger federal role. So one of the central concerns I have in going down there for the legislative conference is how can we further create pressure to support Puerto Rico, especially if we have a new Democratic president and a Democratic Senate. And then on the home front, the next election cycle begins on Wednesday. So I'm going there also to talk to Latino leaders about my vision, to hear their concerns, to engage them as obviously one of the biggest constituencies in the city and growing on what we in this administration are trying to do for the Latino community and what we intend to do in a second term. Yeah.
Security problem that NYPD will face by having both presidential campaigns here on election night, and what you're doing about it.
Yeah, Marcia, we have been preparing extensively. There will be a fuller briefing in the next few days for the media, but I have personally been through several briefings with NYPD. Extraordinary security preparations in place, obviously working very closely with the Secret Service. And it is about the movements of the candidates, but it's also about the facilities in which each event will be happening. That you're going to see very, very substantial reinforcement around each of those facilities. You're going to see a lot of NYPD personnel out on the streets. So to state the obvious, Tuesday, particularly as we go into the afternoon, evening, it's going to be harder to get around certain parts of Manhattan, and there's going to be a very, very extensive police presence. Yeah, in the later part of the day, the one thing to remember about the electoral timing is, our polls close at 9 p.m., but the results are going to wait on Mountain Time and Pacific Time. I think Obama went out after 1 a.m. with his victory speech in 2012. So I think what's going to happen is sort of as the evening rush hour progresses, you're going to see more and more activity, particularly around Midtown. When you get into the later evening, then especially, it's going to have an impact. But by that point, a lot of people, of course, would have left Midtown. Okay. Oh, yes, last call.
2 years ago, the DOI demonstrated that it's very easy to commit voter fraud in New York City.
I don't agree with that assessment. I just don't. It's not very easy to commit voter fraud.
To show up. Do you have faith?
I have total faith in the integrity, as I said earlier, I have total faith in the integrity of our elections. I do not have faith in the efficiency of our elections. And that's where we need law changes in Albany. Thanks, everyone.